Like, everybody's trying to start a podcast, and just because you can doesn't mean you should, and that is true. I feel like not everybody needs to start a podcast. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. As you can see, we're filming from a different location today, filming while driving. We're going to be talking about how to start a podcast. These are just tips on how to get started, not an in-depth tutorial yet. I can do a video on that. We're going to go ahead and get into it. Just still had a checklist that I had prior to me making the podcast, because it gave me a step-by-step guide on what I needed to have done before and during the podcast. But I can kind of remember off the top of my head what I did. First off, I went to Canva and I made me a logo. I thought about what I wanted the name to be called, and it's called The Athlete Section. Go check it out. We'll be starting that back up again a little bit later this year. But I wanted to make sure I had a logo, and I designed a logo, designed like a little graphic on Canva, free, easy, didn't do anything crazy. Once I designed that, it took me about 10-15 minutes to design a logo. And I think one thing to do is just go ahead and get started. Don't overthink it. Don't think, well, I need to pay this person to do this, I need to pay this person to do that. Eventually, yes. Eventually, you might have to put some more money into it. Eventually, you might need to go ahead and have a little bit more professional services. But starting off, yes, definitely bring your best self to your podcast, but go ahead and just get started. Have a game plan and get started. Like, everybody's trying to start a podcast, and just because you can doesn't mean you should, and that is true. I feel like not everybody needs to start a podcast. Feel in your heart that what you're doing needs to be out there in the world, and you feel like the podcast is one of the best ways to do it, I think you should go ahead and go for it. But just with a plan and a purpose. Like, don't just do it and be like, okay, everybody's starting a podcast, let me start a podcast. I did take a podcast class my senior year of college, so I kind of already knew a little bit about how to produce one, but I did it a little bit differently than what I learned in college. My podcast was solely based on guests, so it wasn't a solo podcast. It was actually a podcast that was based off having guests. So you need to figure out if you're going to have, is it going to be a solo podcast? Is it going to be a podcast that has special guests here and there? Or is it going to be a podcast that's solely reliant on having guests? Because then if so, you need to have a checklist full of people you want to reach out to, and think about how often you want that to be. What type of podcast you want to have, like what niche do you want to have, who you're going to be talking about, and how is it going to be valuable for other people to tune into. So I wanted to make sure it's something that is showing my interviewing skills, and also getting me connected to other athletes so they can trust me to tell their story, and they can do it the way they want to, based off of me guiding them with my questions. How often do you want it to be out there? Is it going to be a monthly podcast? You do it once a month? Do you do it every week? Do you do it twice a week? Do you do it once every other month, once every other week? Think about your schedule and like what will fit. And then after you do that, where do you want it to stream? Is it going to be a video-based podcast? Is it going to be just audio? Mine was a video-based podcast, and mine was solely relied on guests. I use Riverside.fm for my podcast platform. People could use Zoom, but they said Riverside was better as far as like recording the podcast. Research different platforms to record your podcast. Like, are you just going to be using voice memo? Are you going to be using a platform? And Riverside.fm is free. You can pay for a version, but I did the free version. And also, just because you set a certain time doesn't mean it has to always be that way. So mine started off as 2 guests per week, so I did it every Wednesday and Friday, and then I switched it to 1 guest per week, so I did it every Wednesday. And now that my schedule might change a little bit, I might start switching it to 1 guest per month or 2 guests per month, depending on how my schedule goes. So, and it's okay to change it every once in a while. Every quarter or period, you feel like, okay, I'm looking to see how this fares and it's doing decent, but I need to kind of switch it up a little bit. It's okay to make a switch and a turnaround within your platform. Just make sure you're at least consistent enough for your audience, though. Make sure it's not just a thing where you're like, oh, I'm posting it every single week, and then you don't starting off the bat. After I figured that out, I reached out to my first guest. I reached out to an athlete that I knew at my school, and she responded on Instagram DM. Go ahead and draft a message that you're gonna send to each person, and explaining who you are, what you're doing, what your podcast is about, why you want them on the podcast, and yeah, ask them if you're interested. And I just did a quick draft of that, and I sent it to her via Instagram DM. And she responded back within like 15 minutes and said, yeah, I'd love to do it. Let's set something up. And so that was my first guest. And after that, I said, okay, if I have this guest for this particular day, I need to make sure I go ahead and have guests for like after her. I reached out to like a bunch of other people I found on TikTok who were like kind of showing their personalities on their page. And that's kind of what I was looking for, quality athletes who had a story to tell, or who I might think have a story to tell. So I used social media to that advantage and was able to reach out to them on TikTok and or Instagram. And most of the time people were just responded back through Instagram. Some people responded back a little bit later. Some people said, oh yeah, I'll do it, and they didn't respond, they didn't follow back up. But ever since I started doing that, I've had a guest. When I wanted 2 guests per week, I had 2 guests per week. Checklist of everybody I had booked. I had their email, the date that I wanted them to get booked on, and if we had to reschedule, I had flexibility to reschedule. And yeah, so that worked out nicely. Also think about where you wanted to stream. Like, do you want it to be an Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube strictly? Because there are ways, and I could give you a separate tutorial on how to like do that, but there are ways to a certain name. I'll put it on here. Definitely look into that. Hopefully these tips helped you guys. Let me know if you guys want more of an in-depth detailed tutorial on how to like do certain things within the podcast world, and I can show you guys that as well. But